Assalamualaikum, welcome back to Cover Me Chic TV. Last week we went over how to measure your body and how to transfer those measurements to a pattern for the puff sleeve tunic. This week we're going to go over how to cut out your pattern with fabric and how to sew it up. Also how to store your pattern with the download below. So stay tuned, this is what you need to get started. So here's what you need. You need about 2.5 yards of cotton lightweight fabric. This is 45 inches wide. If you have 60-inch wide fabric, you probably can get away with 2 yards of fabric. If you want a gale to go with it, I would add a yard. Some fusible interfacing for the collar, either pins or weights to hold down the pattern. Of course, the pattern from last week, and also some fabric scissors. So let's get started. So you fold your fabric in half, selvage to selvage. It's usually the edge, selvage to selvage, because you're going to cut your front and back on the fold. And this is the grain line. So I'll take the back and put this on the fold. Match it up to the edge and make sure the fabric is flat. There's no folds in the fabric. Take my weights. And I do the same thing for the front. And then you cut it out. So next I'm going to cut the sleeve. Either you can open up the fabric wide, or you can cut it on the fold, just fold the sleeve in half and put it like this. But a quicker way to do it, of course, is to fold it in half again, so you only have to cut once. So make sure all the edges match up. So just remember there are 4 layers of fabric on the fold. And you cut it out. Now notch the sleeve and also notch it at the center, at the top and bottom. You'll use this to match up the sleeve later. Now you take scrap fabric or leftover fabric and fold it. So you can cut out the front and back facing and cut one on the fold of each. Now you notch at the neck seam, center front and center back. So you can match this up on the front and back body. Now you have to cut 2 of the cuff. And you can use leftover fabric for that as well. So now you take the fusible and you have to cut that on a fold as well, the front and the back facing. You cut one of each on the fold. Now that you have your pattern all cut out, you need some thread for the sewing machine, a bobbin, a seam ripper just in case you have to take out seams, some pins, and a scissor. Also, you need some elastic. You cut it 2 inches less than your cuff. So minus 2 inches and then cut. You need 2 of these for each cuff. So now we're ready to sew. Sew the front and the back together at the shoulder seams, right sides together. At a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Now you do the same thing for the front and the back facing. You sew it together at the shoulder seam, right sides together, at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And you do the same thing for the fusible. You want to sew the non-sticky side together. So it's face side together at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Now you attach the fusible to the front and back facing, matching the seams. And you're going to sew the outer edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. You pin everything together to make sure everything is flush and sew it at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now you're going to press it wrong sides together so it gives you a clean edge. So now it's pressed, and now you have a clean edge at the end. Now you sew right sides together using the body fabric, the body, and the front and back facing. Match the notches in the front and the back to the center front and the back and the shoulder seam, and you're going to sew it together with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. You may have to trim some of the fuse so that you can see the edge. Again, you sew that at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Take out all the pins. You clipped all the loose. Now you're going to sew it with the seam allowance facing the facing about 1/8 of an inch away from the seam. So this holds the facing down and gives you a clean edge around the collar or the neck. So again, you're sewing 1/8 of an inch away from the seam, the neck seam, with the seam allowance facing the front and back facing. So now you press it down and you get a really clean edge for the neck. Now I'm going to top stitch the front and back facing down 1 inch away from the edge. clip all loose ends. And so you have a clean neck. Next, we're going to hem the notch on the front. It's a 1/2 inch seam. Actually, you fold it twice, and it winds up being a 1/4 inch hem. But you fold it a 1/2 inch first, and then you fold it again to a 1/4 inch, and you top stitch it down. Now we're going to match the edges to sew the front and the back side seam together. You make sure the bottom is even. You sew it at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And you do both sides. And you serge the edges. If you don't have a serger, then you zigzag the edges. Next, we're going to do the sleeve. Let's sew the sleeve together, front and back sleeve together. You do both sleeves. Now change the gauge into the widest stitch because we're going to gather the top and the bottom, 2 rows, 1 1/4 inch away from the edge, 1 1/2 inch away from the edge. And you do that at the top between the 2 notches. And now you pull both rows of stitching together. So you ease in. Then you do the other side and you ease in as well. And that gives you the puff at the top. Now you're going to do the same thing to the bottom so that it fits the cuff. Notch the middle first so you can match the cuff when you sew it together, if you didn't do that when you cut it out. So now we're going to do a 1/4 inch away from the edge, and then you're going to do another one a 1/2 inch away from the edge. And this is still the widest stitch on your machine, so you can gather the bottom. And once you're finished sewing, you're going to pull and ease everything in so it's the same length as your cuff. And this gives you the puff at the bottom. Now you're going to sew your cuff together, 1/2 inch seam allowance. First you change the gauge back to about 2 1/2 or 3, whatever you were sewing at before. And you mark the center so you can match it up to the sleeve. Fold it in half and then press down. So now you're matching the seams together. And ease everything in so that it's even all the way around. And you're only going to sew 1 layer of the cuff. So you match the seam and then you match the notch. Make sure everything is eased in so you don't sew over any folds. You sew over the gathers, but you don't want to sew over any folds. You want everything to be even. So you sew that a 1/2 inch seam allowance. You clip all the loose threads, then you fold. And for the clean edge in the inside of the garment, you fold down a 1/2 of an inch. So you're going to top stitch it, but fold down so it covers the seam. Get rid of all the loose threads as well. If you don't feel comfortable top stitching it, you can always slip stitch it by hand. But I like to top stitch it. It holds better and it's faster. You leave about an inch open so you can put the elastic in. Take out all the pins. Use a safety pin. Clip it to one side of the 1-inch elastic and you feed it through. Now you want to sew the elastic down flat, about a 1/2 inch overlap. You go back and forth a couple of times so it doesn't come apart. So you ease everything in, and then you want to sew down the opening. So you top stitch it. So there's your sleeve. Now you have to attach it to the body. You do the same thing with the other sleeve. And now we're going to attach this to the body, matching the seams, the side seam and the top notch to the shoulder seam, the front and back notch, and then you're going to ease in the gathers so that there's no folds on the body. And this is at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Again, this is a 1/2 inch seam allowance around the armhole. Now you take out all the pins and you serge the edge. And then you have your sleeve. Now we're going to do the 2-inch hem at the bottom. I folded it over and pressed 2 inches. And then I folded it over again an inch. And I pressed it again, so it's very easy to sew. And then you do the same thing with the notch for the back. And that's a 1/4 of an inch away from the edge. And then at the bottom, it's an inch away from the edge. And this is all top stitching. So now you sew the front. You do the same thing. You press 2 inches, then you fold it over an inch, and then you top stitch in an inch away from the edge. And there's your tunic. To store your pattern, download the Cutter's Must right below this video. You print it out and you get a 10 by 13 manila envelope and you tape it to the front. Then you fold up all your pattern pieces. Make sure they fit. You fold to fit. I usually fold the description out so that you don't have to open the whole pattern piece to know what it is. Fold everything. And that's how you store your pattern. If you like this video, please subscribe, like, and share. And if you have any questions, ask in the comments. See you next time. Assalamu alaikum.